Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself. We're going to get in a couple topics around a training update, a little bit of things on mechanical tension, some talk about deloads, and then one more Instagram question that was left over from last week. But before we get into all of these things, Bryan, what is the latest with you?
Back to wearing the beanie. It's really cold and it snowed last night.
It snowed last night?
Yeah, it didn't stick. I guess it stuck when I was driving Bryson to school. It stuck in the area where he is, which is only 10 minutes away from me. So they got about an inch over there and we just got snow, but it didn't stick where I am. But yeah, the cars had snow on them and it's 34 degrees out. So,
Wow.
fuck, man, this is this weird ass Colorado life. I was
Yeah.
looking at howmuchwillitsnow.com, which has become my favorite site recently. And they have a chart where it's actually really cool because they go month by month and by year. So you can compare year to year and month to month, and they show how much snowfall there is by the darkness of the blue color. So like more snowfall, it's darker blue. Like small snowfall, it's like really light blue. And there have been, in the last 10 years, I'd say it has snowed in late May, like 7 of the years. And it snowed in October, 7 of the years. So I think it's like pretty normal to get snow in like 8 months of the year, which is pretty nuts.
Yeah, it is wild. When we were in Denver last fall, like the very first night we showed up, it snowed and was like 27 degrees, in the morning, and it was like October 12th or something,
Right.
something like that.
Well,
Yeah.
it had snowed 8 inches on Labor Day, like literally a month before you were there. So
Oh, holy shit, that's insane.
yeah, but everything on my end is going well. As you alluded to, we do have a big training update for me today, which I'm going to talk a lot about here once we get through these introductions. Diet is going well. For those that follow my story, you'll know that I was just in Austin with you, and we had an awesome time. We did a workout with a photo shoot on Friday afternoon, and it was a full body session. So we started with leg curls and hack squat, and then we went into two upper body pull movements. We did some chest pressing, some lateral raises, some push downs, some curls. Basically hit the entire body. Super rad. Got some great photos. I'm hyped to see them whenever they come out.
Yeah, it should be
And
sick.
and we had some really good discussions too, which I think actually is kind of the impetus for the topic on mechanical tension that we're going to talk about today. And so then along those same lines, kind of with my diet stuff. So I went to Austin and I wasn't able to weigh myself for 2 days. But I ate really well, felt very confident about how much movement I got, just the general food I was putting in my body, etc. Came back and to no surprise, I weighed about a pound over where I left to go to Austin, and that's probably from the inflammation, the flight, the stress,
Flight.
all the different things. And I predicted on my story, I was like, I bet the next day I'm going to lose at least a pound. And sure enough, I weighed this morning and I was back down to the mid 194s. So everything is on track, going as it should. And one other thing about the diet is I realized in June, so June 11th to the 25th, we're going to Wisconsin to visit Kim's family, which is going to be cool, but it's going to be kind of difficult for me to continue like a relatively rigid caloric deficit in that condition, kind of being with family and all the things that go on and not always being in control of my own food. So I'm going to do everything that I can to kind of hang around maintenance, but I think that it's almost going to act as like a 2 week diet break in there. And then I'll get back in late June and kind of make the final push into the low 180s. So the goal would be to get me probably down to about 190 before I go to Wisconsin in a month. And then if I can maintain in the low 190s while I'm there, and then I'll have about 10 pounds to go when I get back. So that's kind of my plan.
Yeah, I don't think that'll be too hard for you, especially, I mean, you can kind of ballpark what you think an estimated maintenance would be with the weight you have lost. And really, it's a little bit of a refeed period. You'll upregulate some leptin for the 2 week period, which will be nice for any kind of hunger you're experiencing. And then, I mean, when you don't have a hard deadline, it really kind of
Exactly.
opens things up. And as long as you're diligent, which of course you are, it's not Like when you really know how to play the game, things like that are not a very big impacting factor.
No, I'm really not too worried about it. I just like kind of decided I wasn't going to purposefully try to like deficit through that. And I was just going to more give myself leeway because, like you said, the main thing being I literally don't have a deadline. I
Yeah.
mean, in my head, I was like, mid to late August, so that maybe by my birthday, which is August 21st, I could be like kind of at my goal and then kind of reverse out of that. But I don't really care. Like if I just end up taking a 3 day diet break for my birthday and then I get back on it and it ends up being mid September, then that's fine too.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to kind of touch on there for that, I want to just kind of revisit what I said previously. For people like you and I, right, and not like oh, people like me and Ryan, but when you really know what you're doing and your lifestyle always supports these types of decisions, doing those things isn't, I would say, negative really in any impact. Where it can be is when you kind of use like trips and excuses to be like, oh, well, I'll just keep going, or I'll take this break and then get back to it. And then next thing you know, you've been like trying to diet for like 7 months, but you don't really make any progress because you take a trip and, binge on alcohol and eat like an asshole and all these things. So there's kind of two sides to it. So I just wanted to kind of provide that little bit of context
Yeah, I
based
feel
on what I
like for
said.
for general population, like if you're not trying to hit a deadline to step on stage, where I think there is utility for 6, 8, 12 month preps in some cases. I think for most general population people, I think, anything more than, what do you think, 4 months in a deficit probably is a good time
Max.
to take a
Yeah.
break and get out of it. So
Yeah, I
that's
would
kind of the
say.
way that, yeah, that's how I would like to see most people approach it, unless they're literally trying to stand on stage and they have a deadline to hit. So
Yeah.
anyway, for what it's worth, what's going on with your diet?
So I actually posted a little update this morning as well. I down into like the low 200s now. I had a 200.8 on Saturday morning, which was my lowest yet. I started at 207.5 was the highest. I am I'm somewhere in the 6 week. I think this is like like almost to like 6 weeks in. I think like Thursday will be 6 weeks. So I'm down. Today was like low 201. So I'm about like down 6 7 pounds, which is right about on schedule. I'm not, because I don't like, I know it'll happen, right? I don't have 20 pounds to lose. I have like maybe, another 3 to 4 to kind of see where I'd be at. I'm in no real rush. Still eating a solid amount of food. On my low day, my carbohydrates are at 200, which is still higher than body weight, right? Carbohydrate. Just walking a lot more, and it helps really break up my work day, which I think has really, really been beneficial. It gets me fresh back to my computer and stuff again. So that's been cool. Still eating a lot of food, fitting in fruit and different things, rotating fruit with my breakfast. So make sure I'm still getting a lot of nutrient dense foods in. I'm really nothing real too exciting an update from a diet standpoint. One exciting update I do have. My nutrition coaching is opening in a couple days for about a 2 week period before applications will close on May 31st. So whenever you're listening to that, if you are a male who's resistance trained, interested in decreasing body fat, increasing muscle mass, but really learning and gaining a deep education around nutrition for body composition, nutrition for becoming a champion of your own health, a lot of these things at a deeper level. Take a look at my metabolic performance protocol. I only release it a few times per year. The next one will not be for months after that one. And reach out to me. You can hit the Straker Nutrition Co. website or ping me on, Instagram will probably be easiest, or an email, and we'll get that conversation going. But as always, I love teaching this. It is kind of my mesh of traditional nutrition coaching with a full-blown education course all in one, to do it in kind of real time, weekly calls, the whole nine, weekly check-ins. So definitely give it a check there, please.
I can attest to this too. I have a number of clients that have gone through Evolved program that have also gone through errands, and have a couple of them have come back for a second dose. So it's
Yeah,
that good. And so if you're considering that type of atmosphere for your education, I definitely recommend it.
thanks, B.
One question for you as well: where do you think your body fat percentage is right now?
So I would say 12,
That was kind of what I
maybe
was gonna guess too.
maybe like high 11s. I think I'm going to, as a kind of a cool experiment, there's a DEXA here. Jenny did it a couple weeks ago. So I think I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to try, probably not the same day, because I want to do it under like the same time of day The gym here has a body impedance analysis machine, like a
The most piece of shit ever, right?
well, they're easily manipulatable is the hard
Yes.
part. But if you
Yeah.
control your variables, if you always take them at, let's say first thing in the morning where you're fasted, where you had maybe after a low day of food or after a high day of food, as long as you control your variables from each time you use it, it can be pretty decent at giving you a consistent trend. But what I want to see is like, okay, generally the DEXA reads a little bit high for body fat percentage, and then the BIA can read like low. So I want to see like, okay, I'm going to take them like a day apart. I'm going to control all my variables, and I want to see just to see what it says. So I think, realistically, I'm about 12% body fat. That one thing that's really interesting is people really, I guess the correct terminology would be deflate their body fat percentages.
Always. Yep.
So, like for example, I was talking to a guy when we were living in Virginia last year. Yeah, last year. And he was asking me some questions. He's like, "Well, I'm 8% body fat, but I'm like just trying to lose some of this lower back fat I have back here."
You're like at 8%, you don't have lower back
Yeah,
fat,
dude.
bro.
Yeah. Yeah, like you are absolutely shredded at 8%. There is no losing lower back fat. And then he was like, "Well, I'm on trend too." And I was like, "Oh my God." He was maybe like 22 years old. And I was like, "You're just ruining yourself, dude." Yeah, really interesting. People have just these like
Distorted views of body
distorted
fat
views. Yeah.
percentage. Yeah.
What I generally do, or when people ask me, I recommend them to this like picture I pulled off the internet. I forget who posted it, but it's like a screenshot I keep on my desktop, and it's like this image is about 5 to 8%, or sorry, like 3 to 5, and it's like your crazy shredded, stage day bodybuilder. This is your like 7 to 10. This is like you're like 10 to 12, and it gives you like within a range, and that's all we're really after when we want to know what percentage. It's like what approximate 3% are you in there.
For sure. And
So
then comparing yourself to yourself.
exactly. So for myself, the two main places that I will notice where my body fat will accumulate is going to be like the lower abs and then the like side lower back, kind of like that, almost like love handle area. When I get to like, that's when I know, like when I'm pushing calories, or when I was up at like 207, I'm like, okay, these are getting kind of like thick there, kind of like some slabs of bacon back there. I'm putting on some body fat. When I'm getting lean, once I start seeing like veins coming through different parts of my abs, and I'm not talking about like these massive veins, right? I can be like, oh, holy shit, there's a vein there in my abs. Like, I know like that's like when I'm getting like probably 10, maybe a high 9. For me, I don't really see a need of getting leaner than that unless I were planning to get on stage one day.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where I was going with that question. It's kind of to ascertain, like, so you said, what do I have left to lose? Maybe 3 pounds. So I was kind of thinking, like, okay, that would take you down to about 10% body fat, and that would take you, into the high 190s. So then if you were to make that jump from high 190s at 10% to 5% body fat, that's about 10 pounds of pure fat, but you got to think you'll probably lose 2 or 3 pounds of muscle along the way
If
too.
not
So
more.
yeah, so I mean, you would be like a low to mid 180s on stage, and that's kind of what I was just trying to figure out.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's actually like pretty large, like low to mid 180s at 5'11" or 6 feet or whatever is like a pretty solid place to be.
Yeah, the last time I was those sorts of weights was, oh my goodness.
You didn't have as much muscle as you do now, anyway.
Yeah, no way. I was probably like 2011 was the last time I was in the like 180s. So a solid decade, and I didn't have nearly as much muscle as I do now. But one day, it's like the only thing I really haven't competed in is like a bodybuilding competition. So one day I'll do it. I know for sure.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, do you want to move on to my training update?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Sweet. Okay, so man, I've been on this upper lower program for a while. Upper lower rest, and it just kind of continues endlessly like that. And I really like it. I think that the volume aligned with the frequency for leg days is perfect. So I'm hitting really, really low volume legs, which is like, 3 to 4 sets for quads and 2 to 3 sets for hamstrings. And that soreness is clearing just in time for me to train legs again 3 days later. So in some ways, that's working for legs. In upper body is kind of where I'm having the issue because I'm realizing that the amount of volume that I can handle or need for upper body is significantly larger than what it is for legs. And with that in mind, I had this idea to change to a push pull leg split. The thing I like about the push pull legs is that it keeps the like body parts together. So there's less kind of connective tissue and joint fatigue. It's 5 days until I train the push muscles again, and then it's 5 days till I train the pull muscles again. And the way this would go would be push, pull, rest, legs, rest. So that's what I mean by every 5 days I would train a muscle group. And then the other side of using push-pull legs would be that I can now increase leg volume slightly because I don't need that soreness to clear within 3 days. I need that soreness to clear within 4 days or something like that. So that was kind of my initial idea going into it. And I literally sat down and I wrote up the entire program. And then a guy DM'd me. So this guy I've had a number of conversations with in the past. His name is Peter Przelj, I think. He's from, I want to say Eastern or Northern Europe. He totally told me where he was from, and I feel like such an idiot because I don't actually remember. But he's really, really smart. I think he has like a master's degree in biomechanics engineering or something along those lines. But he's actually the guy that gave me the idea on my leg curl and my leg extension machine to put a plate on the insert pin so that it changes the resistance curve of the machine.
Can you elaborate on that quickly?
Yeah. So when I first got my leg curl and leg extension machine, there's like this insert pin that you put in so that the rotational handle where the weight gets loaded on, it stops at the bottom so that it doesn't just swing endlessly back and forth, so that when it hits the loading pin at the bottom, the tension curve is such that almost all of the tension is at the shortened range of the movement. So in a leg extension, that would be at lockout, and in a leg curl, it would be when your heels are close to your butt. So if you do not adjust the tension curve at all, and you just go with like the stock way that the machine was built, all of the tension is there, and there's no tension, like literally none at the stretch position. So when you go to the bottom of the leg extension or the top of the leg curl, it's like the weight is just kind of floating there. Like there's no resistance at all.
Gotcha.
So I was like super down on my machine, and I made a post like many, many months ago. And I was like, this stupid leg curl, leg extension machine, I don't know what to do with this resistance curve. It's awful. And he just immediately wrote me and like sent me a diagram with like a picture and an arrow pointing to the plate and being like, put a plate here. And now it essentially starts and stops your range of motion, 6 inches from where it usually would start or stop your range of motion. And you can alter the tension curve in that manner.
Perfect.
Yeah. So super smart dude. Very thankful for that. And then even more thankful for him writing me and engaging in discussion with me over the last 24 hours. A lot of back and forth, which he really didn't have to do. Where he kind of talked to me about, why am I choosing a push-pull legs? Like, let's do a needs analysis here. So I did a needs analysis, and what we ended up determining, which I knew, I just, for whatever reason, I didn't think it all the way through. But my chest and my legs tend to recover a little bit slower. They get more sore. I need a little bit less volume for them. But my back and my delts tend to be able to handle a lot more volume, a lot more frequency, and they really don't get sore at all. So with that in mind, he was like, why would you then just train every muscle group every 5 days when maybe your chest and your legs need to be trained every 5 days, but maybe your back and your delts can be trained a little more often than that? So we kind of did some back and forth, and he proposed a split to me. And then I was like, no, I think I can improve upon that. And what I ended up coming up with in my improvement upon it was a split in which chest, back, and delts are trained on one day. Then back, delts, and arms are trained on another day. So I'm hitting back and delts both twice. But I'm only hitting chest and arms once, right? And then the other day is leg day. So it's still the 5 day split. So it's still like upper body, rest, legs, rest, right? More actually, no, it's not exactly that, because the way that we organized it was to put legs first in the rotation. So it was legs, upper rest, then upper rest. But either way, hitting each of the 3 workouts over a 5 day period. But back gets hit twice, delts get hit twice, and everything else gets hit once over that 5 day period.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, totally. So I'm super thankful for him helping me kind of come up with that and think through that process. And I'm really looking forward to kind of continuing with this structure, hopefully, over the foreseeable future, at least kind of through the diet here.
One question for you. Are you going to continue training with like the top set and back off set? Or
Yeah, so
sets like
that
we talked?
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually a good point. So one of the other things that I've kind of been doing in my training recently is, instead of going with like 3 or 4 straight sets at the same weight, I'm essentially building to a top set. Most compound movements will get that top set in the 6 to 10 rep range, and then there'll be a back off set in the 10 to 15 rep range for most compounds. I don't follow that same structure for isolations, like for lateral raises, bicep curls, tricep extensions. I don't think top set, back off set is necessarily my bread and butter there. I'd rather stick with like maybe 3 or 4 sets of 10 to 20 reps for those kind of isolation movements. But for legs, back, and chest, the top set, back off set really works. And I basically designed this 5 day split over a 10 day period. So I have like 2 iterations, like 2 kind of microcycles that I go through, where I get a little bit more movement variety. And I kind of won't find the monotony of kind of hitting the same movements all the time. One adjustment that I need to make to it is that I programmed this with the pendulum squat in. But we know, if you pay attention to my stories, that my pendulum squat doesn't arrive for at least another month. They said, they said beginning of June. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to Wisconsin on June 10th. So my hope is that the pendulum squat arrives before June 10th, and I can build it and have it ready to go. Versus having to deal with the shit that I dealt with last year when we went to Wisconsin, which was all of my home gym equipment arrived while I was in Wisconsin. Like, because I had no home gym last year.
Yeah.
So I ordered all this equipment, and literally 80% of the equipment I ordered arrived while I was in Wisconsin. So I had to have my uncle and my dad come over and basically move all of these big ass pieces of equipment boxes into the garage so that they wouldn't just be sitting out in the rain. And then I got home and I had literally like 4 machines to build upon getting back home. So I'm hoping that this year I can just have the pendulum squat built up, go to Wisconsin, come home, integrate the pendulum squat into the program, and go from there. But right now I'm subbing in a heels elevated safety bar squat on one of the days for pendulum, and then I think I'm going to do a single leg variant on the other day. Either that like drop lunge that I've been doing, or a split squat of some sort, but I haven't gotten to that day yet. So today was day 1. I did my first leg day today. It was leg curls, good mornings, heels elevated back squat, which should be pendulum squat, leg extensions, leg press, and then some calves.
That is a big leg day.
But it's really only 1 set plus back off set for each.
Okay, yeah.
It's 10 leg curls. The leg curls, I actually did something that's really cool. So I got it from John Meadows. It's called the Rule of 25. Have you ever heard of this?
No, I don't think so, at least from that term.
Meadows talks about it a lot. So basically what you do is you do a top set of 10 to 12 reps, and then you rest 10 to 15 seconds, and you do 3 or 4 or whatever you can get, and you rest 10 to 15 seconds, and you just basically continue resting 10 to 15 seconds and chipping away until you get to 25 reps. And then you just do 1 set of that. Like, you don't need to do multiple sets. You just literally get to 25 reps, and then that's the end of that movement. So that's what I did for leg curls. So I was literally done with leg curls in 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes or something like that. And then I moved on.
I do like some of those approaches, because it gets you like a lot of, I don't want to call them effective reps, but like reps in that,
It is effective reps, yeah.
Yeah, but like close
close to failure, right?
Exactly, a higher volume of reps closer to failure in a shorter window with that like rest.
More reps
approach.
with slower rep speed.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a really, really good way to put it. As I'm, kind of jarbled trying to get my words out.
Yeah. Well, I will say, after that, because I usually do one set of straight set leg curls and then I go into my good mornings. But this time I went, 25 reps, which was like four failure points basically.
Hmm.
And then I went into my good mornings and they just felt awful. I think I'm going to have to use a lot less weight than I thought because, yeah, the weight that I used, the prior week when I did one set of leg curls, it like buried me. So, I'm gonna drop the weight and kind of work back up in my good mornings next time they come up.
I could see that for sure. You ready to kind of pivot into the mechanical tension conversation?
Yeah, totally. Let's frame it up.
So, how I want to frame this is when Bryan and I were working out this past Friday together, we were on a hack squat, and I realized we were both using like a little bit different of an approach. So, we had set the stopper basically as low as it would go to try and allow us to basically maximize range of motion. And what we kind of noticed, or what I noticed per se, is I was using as max range of motion as I could, but I was stopping just like maybe a half inch below the stopper because I didn't want to have the weight, hit the stopper and then take some of the tension off of my muscles. Whereas Bryan was utilizing the kind of full range of motion, getting and then gently stopping at the stopper each rep for like ever so briefly, and then kind of starting from a dead stop. So in my kind of I don't want to say opinion, I should say thought, it would have been better to basically not touch the stopper and keep more tension in my muscles. But Bryan said, no, like I like doing it this way because of mechanical tension, because there's more mechanical tension this way. So if you can just kind of educate some of the listeners and myself again on why you like this approach.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple pieces to this. I don't think that the way you were doing it is wrong. Like, it's fine if you prefer to keep tension on the muscle, and if that allows you to feel like you're achieving a better stimulus in the muscle. But I think it's also important to understand that what you feel isn't always the whole story.
Good point.
So there's kind of like two sides to that, right? So by keeping tension on the muscle and not stopping at the bottom, you're going to incur more metabolites. That means you're going to have a little bit more lactic acid accumulating in your muscles, and you're going to reach the pain threshold probably a little bit faster. There's very much a time for that. Metabolite training has a place in training. My viewpoint was that if this is our main compound movement for the day, and it's the one that we're using for the most mechanical tension overload, then it would make sense to perform in such a manner that we maximize mechanical tension. And there's no better way to maximize mechanical tension on the muscle than by pushing every single rep from a dead stop. When you add on top of that it decreases metabolites in the muscle because you're essentially getting like what is a quarter or a half second of rest. Rest is almost the wrong way of saying it, but your muscles aren't forced to incur the same metabolite buildup when you stop for a brief split second at the bottom of the rep, that it essentially may allow you to accumulate more quality reps and put your muscles through more of an overload. So that's the way I look at it. And the analogy I used with Aaron was like a pause bench press, where you come down and the bar gently touches and pauses on your chest and then explodes back up versus just doing continuous reps. And essentially, we look at something like a pause bench press as a harder variation of a movement than a standard bench press. So by the same kind of logic, you could assume that the hack squat with a dead stop at the bottom would force the muscles into a little bit more of mechanical tension as well.
Yeah, when you used that example with the bench press, it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh, yeah, because I would never stop my bench press like a quarter inch above my chest without touching it and then do it. But that's exactly what I'm doing, with the hack squat, or like, I wouldn't say the leg press. That was like maybe a different example, because we were still able to achieve like a complete full range of motion. Like you guys can go back, or maybe some of you guys saw the stories, or maybe we'll post it again or whatever, but like full fold, hamstring on calf, like ass to grass, but there was just like that extra little bit. And then when I started, because you said that when we were still warming up, and when I did like the working sets with that, it was a different stimulus. It was definitely more challenging because even that just split second of a reset kind of at the bottom just forces so much more like effort to get that rep moving because there's zero rebound off of your like tendons or anything like that. It was I really really did like it. It was like one of those things where I got to learn something new and I was like, holy shit, this is different. It's good. I was really cool. I was really appreciative of you kind of bringing that up and us having that up. So I wanted to talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah, totally. And then you also use more weight than you usually use on the hack squat too, which may have been environment based as well.
100% environment, because I know when I'm there by myself, there's no one there to save me when I bury myself and get pinned at the bottom of it.
Yeah. Well, I think one quick caveat on the full range of motion, kind of to bottom out a machine, is that kind of assumes that you have the range of motion, that you possess the ability to get there without the low back coming off the pad, or rounding under, going into posterior pelvic tilt. All of the different things that we would look at and be like, ooh, you went too low, So as long as you have the ankle dorsiflexion, the mobility there, and you're able to kind of get into that deep position without compromising the optimal position that your body should be in to produce force through the intended musculature, then more range of motion is usually better than less range of motion. There's, of course, always, caveats to that, like when you look at the way that N1 does the lat focus pull downs, they purposefully avoid, internal rotation at the top of the rep, because that is range of motion, but it's not lat range of motion. It's the argument between using a passive range of motion and an active range of motion. So if you stop your pull down here versus going all the way up, then you're going to stay within the active range of motion of the lat, but you're still getting full range of motion of the lat. You're just not getting full range of motion of the musculature of the back. And the same thing applies when you go and pull down. And I always talk about how if the elbow passes the midline, then the lat turns off. So again, staying in the active range of motion. So there are reasons in certain movements where using the most range of motion possible is just kind of silly. But I think in most cases, at least for most compound movements, especially lower body, I can't imagine too many times where I would be like, oh, you can get lower in that squat. Yeah, let's not do that.
The one that I will kind of, to play devil's advocate there, especially on the hack squat, depending on your foot position. So if your feet are a little bit further out in front of you and then your shins go from knees being over toes to then shifting back to being more vertical, and then that extra range of motion is just coming from hip flexion, that is like a position where like you want to not necessarily decrease your range of motion, but you want to set yourself up with a more advantageous position to allow the knees to stay out over the toes for what you're, all depending on why you're using the hack squat, right? It's probably not for hip flexion. It's for like the full squat pattern. So
yeah, for sure.
And
There. The shifting of the knees back thing, since you pointed that out, that you were doing that, a month or two ago in some video that you put up, I've actually noticed in watching other people hack squat that I see that very, very often. Like a lot of people are letting the last couple inches of the movement, letting their knees shift back and sinking down into the hips more, versus keeping the knees forward and keeping the tension into the quad. So I think that's just something super interesting that you pointed yourself out that you were doing it, and suddenly I'm seeing it everywhere. So common problem,
One of those things you want to video yourself just to see, hey, does like an objective video of my range of motion and form line up to how I think it does? And oftentimes the answer is no, it doesn't. And that's why it's good to help video yourself, just to give yourself a little bit of like a, not even an ego check, just a, hey, is my form movement actually how I think it is?
Right. I actually think that sinking down might be a glute thing versus a hip thing, because the hips are kind of trapped like against the pad. So I think that sinking down and the knees back might be like, essentially adding tension into the lower glute at that bottom position.
Or lower back, yeah.
Maybe a little bit of lower back.
That's like if you're doing like super deep leg presses and you like smoke your lower back and you come off with like a crazy gnarly lower back bump, yeah. Cool. Bryan, I know you had some additional thoughts on deloading and different ways you wanted to potentially implement it. Do you want to transition into that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's important when we talk about these kind of different deload styles that we look at training through three phases. There's like the mechanical tension driven phase where we're really focusing on straight sets in hypertrophy rep ranges type thing. And then there's neural training, which I think you could just call a strength phase, which would be like kind of low rep work that is that's done a little further from failure, and you're really just trying to build better neural patterns so that you become better at performing movement under load. And then the other phase would be metabolite accumulation or things along those lines. So the way that the company N1, we talk about them a lot regarding, kind of some of the cool biomechanics work that they're doing, but they structure their training in those three phases just like I do. I don't call it a neural phase, I call it a strength phase. But from what I understand, and I wouldn't want you to go forward and be like, Bryan said this is the way N1 does this, because this is 100% not true. I have not taken their courses or anything. But from what I gather on like a very general sense is that they tend to use these metabolite and neural phases almost in place of having to take a deload at times. I don't think that they don't deload at all. I think that they do when it's necessary, but the way that kind of they may look at things is that the use of the metabolite and the neural phases give your body a rest from hypertrophy work, from volume at heavy loads, and the neural phase, you're doing lower volume at high loads, which is a very different stimulus. And for the metabolite stuff, it really is systemic and peripheral conditioning. So I know for sure that they separate their metabolite work into two different appearances. So one is what they would call peripheral or local fatigue. And in this example, they use the old Vince Garanda method or something similar to that. The Garanda method was 8 sets of 8, but you do it with like a 15 to 20 RM weight. And then you only rest 30 seconds after each set. So I talked to, when I was up at N1 training, I asked CJ about it, and I was like, dude, I tried this one day, like a number of years ago. I didn't know about N1 at the time, but I was trying to do the Garanda method. And I was like, man, I did incline dumbbell press, and I used my like 15 or 20 RM, but by like set 4, I couldn't even do it anymore. I had to extend my rest. And he was like, well, that's because you're using a movement that's overloaded in the lengthened position. And I was like, okay, is that bad? And he was like, yeah, because there's a ton of mechanical tension and stress occurring when you're doing that. So he's like, you have to use the Garanda method with movements that are overloaded in the shortened position. So that would be like a leg extension or a cable crossover. So like a crossover is a great one, but a dumbbell fly would be an awful one because a dumbbell fly is the opposite of a cable crossover where it's overloaded in the lengthened position. So that's one thing. I know that they use things like that. And when you think about the fact that shortened position movements are significantly less damaging, like way, way, way less damaging. You can do cable crossovers forever and not get as sore as you would from like 2 sets of dumbbell flies. So I think that when you think about the fact that they're using this 8x8 method to create peripheral metabolite accumulation, which is, local musculature, that makes a ton of sense as a way to almost throw in like a pseudo deload. Second is they use what they call, I don't know what they call them. They're like systemic fatigue circuits, and they essentially do like, rounds of full body supersets where you might go from like a squat to a bent over row to a bench press rest. And then you might go like, RDL to something else to something else, right? So you have like full body circuits that are essentially creating the ability to adapt better, to clear metabolites, is the proper phrasing, to clear metabolites. So the way that the rationale might appear is that by clearing these metabolites faster and being in better cardiovascular conditioning, you get less sore between your workouts, you recover faster, you don't need as long rest periods when you're in session, which allows you to accumulate more volume. So it's very interesting to me because that whole systemic circuit thing, it looks a lot like controlled CrossFit to me. It's like it's not, but it's not like they're spending the whole year in these phases, right? It's just like a tool that's used, and I wouldn't even begin to tell you what the ratio of like hypertrophy to metabolite to neural phase would be, or any of that. Um, but I know that they do tend to try to use these types of different training techniques as in like 1 to 2 week doses versus just having like a deload week. So you might be going for like say 6 to 8 weeks of hypertrophy, and then you're just becoming kind of slow, and you're not recovering well. You're starting to stall or hit a plateau or whatever. So then you go into a metabolite phase or a neural phase and then a metabolite phase. I don't even know what order they put them in, but I just thought that as like an alternative way of deloading, that this is unique and new, and I don't know enough about it to talk about it much beyond what I have. But if anyone's interested, I would encourage you to go check out the stuff at N1 and read their website and kind of go down that rabbit hole of a different way of doing things.
That is really, really cool. Just again, it's like just a whole new world, right? Of when you open it up from that with deload. And what's really kind of cool is when I put together my most recent training block for my clients, right? The end part of it, as we are deeper into a calorie deficit. The way I structured it was like, okay, well, we're in a calorie deficit. We're going to be at a, depending on how you talk about it, like a moderate calorie deficit here. From a hypertrophic standpoint, we're probably not going to be adding new muscle because there's just, for the majority of people, probably not, right? I don't like speaking in absolutes. What is one thing we could work on? Work capacity. So that was kind of the goal of when I wrote that, is like we can build and work on our like engines a little bit by kind of doing some controlled like supersets and stuff like that, because even in a deficit you can get better at like work capacity and cardiovascular shape and stuff. And then I thought, okay, well, that will help us with our goal of increasing energy expenditure a little bit. So it is cool to think there, to see that. I mean, this is, don't get me wrong, purely confirmation bias from my standpoint, that there's people doing this at like a much deeper level of like exact science and putting a lot more into strategy. Yeah. But that's really, really cool.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna go read some more about it. Like I just wanted to kind of introduce the topic to you guys and give you an avenue to go learn more about it on your own. But right now, I don't really feel confident enough to speak on it any further than I have, really.
Yeah, but I mean, you still covered it pretty well. But as an introduction, I think for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. So do you want to get into this last question we had from leftover from last week?
Yeah, I think we're both going to see this pretty similarly. So the person basically asked, cardio before or after lifting, and why?
Yeah. So from my standpoint, the first stab I'm going to take at this is, what is your goal? If your goal is strength, hypertrophy, any sort of iron sport athlete type deal, the second question I have is, why are you doing cardio? Right. So if your goal is hypertrophy or whatever, anything of that regard, cardio is always going to go after. You don't want to do any sort of, I mean, you want to hit your training session, that your training, your exercises, your sessions, as fresh as possible, with as much, left in the tank, ready to go. There's no real reason I see of doing cardio before that, especially depending on what type of cardio you're doing. Are you like, going hard on the stair climber, getting super sweaty and out of breath? That's only going to impact your training unless you're doing like shoulders and arms or something like that. If your training goal was like, I have a client who's doing like an alpine climb up in, oh boy, I think like Oregon or Washington in a couple weeks. So we've been like strategically pulling back his leg volume, increasing more of these like strategic cardio days where I was like, you can hit some arms or something after, but like, I mean, get what you came for, which is like for this alpine climb type thing. If you have like a big cardiovascular type goal like that, you want to do it before, and then you probably need to question whether lifting post is even beneficial at all based on your proximity and stuff. So judging from, I think that this question is coming from someone who just wants to do some cardio for general cardiovascular health, right? To just make sure your resting heart rate isn't slowly increasing over time because you never get sweaty or out of breath or anything like that. I'm always going to say in that circumstance to do it post training. What do you have to add to that, Bryan?
Yeah, my general view on cardio, if we assume that the pursuit is a an iron sport pursuit where strength and hypertrophy are the goals. I would even rather see the person put the cardio as far away from training as possible so that it's not before or after. It's just a different session completely. And then to even expand on that further, I think that putting cardio as far away from your leg training as possible is the best route. So when I have people that ask me, I want to run twice a week or I want to bike twice a week or whatever it is, and I want to do your upper lower 4 times a week programming, like where should I fit in my runs? My general advice is to try to leave 36 hours on either side of leg day. So usually what that means is doing it in the same day as upper body, but doing one in the morning and one at night, and then trying to keep leg day as far as possible away from that, whether you do that in the morning or the night on the prior day, or whether there's a rest day before or after. But just trying to maneuver it within your schedule in that manner, because that way I think we would have the least interference effect. I think the next best would be to do it after, but I kind of wonder whether my intuition tells me that doing cardio after a leg day sends the wrong signal. Like I think I I can't advise in good faith. I can't advise someone to be like, yeah, sure, like I prefer your cardio to be after training, so do your really hard leg work, send the signal for mechanical tension and muscle protein synthesis, and then let's go into catabolism for like 30 minutes while you go do cardio. Like that just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think after a leg day, you should probably just go sit down and recover if your goal is to add muscle and strength. So maybe putting it closer to the upper body day or doing it after upper body day would make a little bit more sense in that case.
The last thing I have there, that you kind of brought up, which was good. It depends on like how much you're doing, right? So, and how you view it. For example, days that I have time, I try and walk for about 8 to 9, 10 minutes post gym, just to kind of help me transition from sympathetic nervous system dominant back to parasympathetic, help with the reduction of the cortisol that's just basically increased from my training session, which induces that kind of fight or flight, and just kind of help me start to transition back into parasympathetic. Do I look at that as cardio? No, my heart rate is, I don't know, maybe low 100s. I'm not walking very hard or fast. I'm like anywhere from like 2.7 to like 3 miles per hour. I'm 5'11" with very long legs. That's not a very fast walk for me. I don't do it for cardio. I just do it as a kind of like a cool down. The same way I generally will ride like a spin bike as like a warm up to get blood flow in my legs and stuff before. Do I look at that as cardio? No. Am I doing it for cardiovascular health or because it helps with fat loss or anything? Like, no, I'm just doing it to kind of cool down before I go home or and eat or shower or whatever. But that's my kind of last tidbit there.
I think that the key there is that it's really not cardio. Like it, when I think of cardio, I think of something that's putting you into that catabolic state, where cortisol is just continuing to flow. And I think that given that you're using it as a means of getting into the sympathetic nervous state, it's probably actually having the opposite effect where it's helping you kind of clear cortisol and kind of get back into an anabolic state post workout. So I think it's very different to think about walking 8 to 10 minutes after versus cardio, which when I think cardio, like I don't think like low intensity steady state, which is walking basically, that's very, very different than middle intensity steady state or interval training. So middle intensity steady state would be like jogging really slowly, and then anything above jogging really slowly would start to get into high intensity. So yeah, I think anything walking, as long as you're not walking like power walking really fast, I think is probably going to be just fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anything else you want to add to this one, Brian?
No, I think we're good, man. I think it was a solid episode.
Yeah, I think it was really cool. The training change talk was really good. The mechanical tension talk, really, really good. Always really good stuff. So from me, myself, and Bryan, guys, have a good week. We'll talk to you guys next Tuesday.
Peace.